So it turns out, as we saw there, that there was a secret leaked inquiry, part of that inquiry that said that Commodore Kafer, well, it was critical of him in some senses, and that there was some support for the judgment that Stephen Smith exercised at the time. But Annabelle, columnists as varied as Dennis Shanahan and Mike Carlton have suggested that
quite varied.
Yes, that Stephen Smith should resign.
Yeah. Look, I reckon what's happened this week has just been one of these classic sort of civilian versus defence things, right, where Stephen Smith is being shellacked for being, out of touch with the constituent members of his portfolio, not being close enough to defence chiefs, riding roughshod over them. Neil James from the Defence Association's been talking about how he's, a manifestly unsuitable defence minister and so on. And on the other side, the civilian kind of perspective on this whole affair, I think, would probably be to look at what Smith said and think, well, what is the problem with that? I mean, half this week I felt like I was missing something. Stephen Smith came out and said, well, look, it's inappropriate for this woman who's just been through this particular ordeal to be pursued for other disciplinary infractions.
At the same time, to have this parallel inquiry into what was rather minor offences. Now, that's, Gerard, what he took offence with right from the start. And the second inquiry, the leaked inquiry, seems to back that up.
Well, I don't think the minister should resign, and I don't think the minister should apologise, but there was an inquiry and the Commodore was cleared and he's going back to work. I think that resolves the issue. We can argue about all these points. I mean, these days people are invariably calling for people to resign, or someone else is calling for someone to apologise, but I think it's a matter of getting on with the job. If there is a criticism of Minister Smith, it's from General Cantwell in an article in yesterday's Sydney Morning Herald, where he spoke about his performance as minister. Now, I know there are other people in the Defence Force who strongly support...
What he did say, just to interrupt, that he has no respect for those who wear the uniform, but he didn't offer any evidence to support that proposition.
Well, look, I quite like Stephen Smith, so I'm not here to bag him, but General Cantwell did offer evidence because he spoke about the reaction from the minister during briefings and when the minister was in Afghanistan, and comments the minister allegedly made about troops asking questions. I mean, this is a considered piece.
What he raised there was a situation where the minister was there to address the troops, and then Cantwell then arranged for the troops to ask questions of the minister without first discussing it with him. Now, whether that's inside the military or outside of it, I think if you've had any dealings with federal ministers, you know that it's smart to run that past them before you drop it on them.
All I'm saying is that what General Cantwell's come up with is a legitimate criticism. It might be true, it might be false, it might be somewhere in the middle. I think that's much more substantial than the minister's reaction to this report. Look, the point is there was an independent QC given the job. He's cleared the Commodore. Commodore goes back to work. I think at that stage there's not much point arguing about all this.
The broader question that it raises is the Defence Minister on side enough with the defence establishment? That seems to be the core of the criticisms that are being made.
To what extent he needs to be on side?
Yeah,
what it's about.
That's the better question. This would be about the only workplace in the country where the workers think they could tell the boss how to behave. Not even Qantas workers would go to that extent with Alan Joyce, but apparently every defence minister has to bend to the will of the defence forces, not just the troops on the ground and the pilots in the air and the Navy at sea, but all the bureaucrats.
And the handling of this case points up the very fact that it shouldn't work that way, because clearly there's a problem within the military that the military themselves don't get. They don't understand the extent of it.
Apparently there is no cultural issue at all from their perspective. So if a minister raises an issue on behalf of the community, and he represents the community in this as much as he represents the Defence Department as its minister, there clearly is a cultural issue here. Now,
but it doesn't work this way, George. I mean, if it works this way, you've got to say that people like Kim Beazley were absolutely hopeless. They couldn't prevail over the ADF. You've got to say Peter Reith was absolutely hopeless. That no ministers... This is not how it works. I mean,
but there are sometimes... The difficulty of defence pulling rank on a minister each time is actually a big issue for public policy in Australia. And you want your defence minister to be able to pull rank. Because what the department does is...
What happened was a QC was given a job to inquire. The QC went away and did the job, came back with the report and said the Commodore could go back to work. That's not
the responses since then. The responses this week
this isn't about that issue.
There is a problem there in
jumps
terms of who runs the show.
Well, these are responses from retired military people. They're not responses.
Yeah, but to what extent do they... Like Neil James, for example, I think gives the impression he's speaking on behalf of the military, those who wear the uniform. But let's hear the angle that he took against as part of his criticism this week.
I think he made the comments quite deliberately because they'd suited his own political ambitions to make those comments. Well, it's no secret that Stephen Smith hopes to lead the Labor Party at some stage, and this was an issue, particularly for a man reputed not to be popular among female voters, that would make him look good. He appeared to seize his moment and took it.
Okay, so this is the moment this week when my head officially exploded, right? Because, you know, this whole... We do such a great line in conspiracy theories in this country at the moment. Like, the idea that Stephen Smith has planned this entire thing to sort of drop on International Women's Day and have Australian women drop, you know, and in admiration of him, I just think is completely bizarre. And if you looked at Stephen Smith's entire career, I think you would be hard-pressed to label this guy a kind of haggard self-promoter.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
James
that the comments that he made about this particular issue, maybe he just made because he believed them, and I think a lot of people wouldn't believe.
But Neil James is an advocate and a commentator. General Morrison, Chief of Army, addressed the Sydney Institute 2 weeks ago, was very strongly supportive of Stephen Smith. So who do you take? Do you take General Morrison, Chief of Army, or do you take an advocate? I think Neil James does a good job for his cause, but he doesn't represent the Australian Defence Force. He doesn't represent the Australian Army.
Who does he represent?
No, you're not arguing. You're trying to argue, but you actually agree.
People can sign up and become members of his organisation, and a lot of retired military people do, and some other people do. And why shouldn't he do that? I mean, he just takes place in the public debate. There's nothing.
He said that Stephen Smith has a problem with women. I haven't seen any polls to
I don't know. Maybe
bear that out.
maybe in the James
Yes,
household.
Barry, but if we're going to pick out every commentator who makes an exaggerated comment without a poll, you won't just be getting stuck into Neil James. You'll be covering heaps of them. I mean, he's not the only one who makes comments without polls.
And we do. But this morning, it's Neil James. Because his comments are most relevant to what we're talking about this week. Now, in all of this, I think what has been lost is the core issue. And let's hear from Duncan Lewis, the Secretary of the Department.
The initial part of the report is, in my view, unpleasant and sobering reading. And I want to, today, make it clear that the DLA Piper report is a compilation of plausible allegations, including some extremely serious allegations of criminal acts. But they are allegations, and all of these allegations need to be tested and examined, and we are going to do that in the next phase.
Now, this has been a secondary story to the political one, hasn't it? But now you've got a situation where these allegations of more than 700 cases of abuse and so on that's gone on within the military. Now, that does suggest a systemic problem.
Does it? What happened?
700 doesn't?
Well, what happened here was that advertisements were put in newspapers saying, if you've got a complaint, let us know. Then there was a Four Corners program that led to further complaints, because Four Corners said, if you've got a problem, let them know. This goes back to 1951. This is 60 years. If you put in a complaint and ask... I didn't go to a university college, for example, but if you put in an advertisement in a Melbourne University newspaper or a Melbourne newspaper and said anyone who felt they had a complaint about how they were treated in their first year at university colleges, you would probably get more than 700. I mean, you've got to put this in perspective. One of these goes back to 1951. That's over 60 years ago. Now, I'm not saying that some of these aren't serious, but if you advertise...
But even if that is right, why should the university colleges be the benchmark for the military? These people wear the uniform
well,
and
they are representing a country in a way that most of us will never get to do.
And then the review body says, what we need is another body to look into this, and a body just like us, which to me seems to be more work. It's like Ray Finkelstein's report on the media. Ray Finkelstein said, we need a permanent body to look into the media, funded by the government. I'm a retired judge and I'm an eminent lawyer, and it should be headed by a retired judge or an eminent lawyer. This group's done exactly the same.
Still, it needs to be done, though, doesn't it? Now that these allegations have come forward,
once you advertise, you've got to follow up.
Well, Barry, this is actually a classic example of what is wrong in our public debate. So... plausible cases of abuse, plausible allegations are raised, a number of them, and you say, well, everybody does it, therefore it didn't happen. Well, that's clearly factually incorrect.
No, you're verbling me, George.
No, I'm not verbling you. I'm talking more
it's exaggerated.
I didn't say it didn't happen. I'm simply saying that if you go back to all kind of organisations and you advertise and you ask people to come forward, they'll come forward with plausible cases.
Look, specifically, I wasn't talking about you just then, Gerard. I was actually talking about the tone of the debate in this past week. So two things happen. One, the argument is, oh, well, it happens everywhere, so let's forget it. And the other one is, let's see if we can resume the hostage situation in federal parliament and ask for Stephen Smith's resignation. This is nonsense. Let's deal with the facts of this matter. And look, I'm past the point where you even say alleged victim. In the case that triggered this thing, she was a victim.
How much of this?
And you've got a response to that situation, which is that the disciplinary process that was applied reflexively to that circumstance was to discipline this person, this victim,
about something
else. Now, it's not exactly, you're asking for it, but, geez, you can see it from there just about, can't you? I mean, and if that's not a cultural problem, then I'm not sure exactly what is.